The content in this episode is intended for entertainment only. This episode is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please check with your doctor.
Can I call you David, or would you prefer Dr. David Fajgenbaum?
No, please call me David. That'd be perfect.
Hey everyone, I'm Evelyn, the creator, producer, and host of Reppin. Thank you always for being here with me. Now, picture this. You're a young athletic individual, suddenly confronted with a life-altering diagnosis of an extremely rare disease. That's the reality my guest faced. He was a football player, then he became a med student. He was on top of the world, and then all of a sudden, his body started to shut down, and he was diagnosed with Castleman Disease. It's an exceedingly rare condition. He hovered on the brink of survival, and the medical community told him there were no more options. My guest, driven by determination, audacity, and maybe a little insanity, reminds me of, he's sort of like the Indiana Jones of medicine. Why? Well, because he took matters into his own hands, and he delved into and experimented with existing medications designed for different conditions, and he used himself as the ultimate test subject. He bravely rewrote the rulebook, defying the odds, armed only with hope and love, and he risked it all in a quest to survive and thrive. He's an American immunologist and author of Chasing My Cure, a doctor's race to turn hope into action. Today, he's going to share his harrowing journey, the audacious risks he took, and what kept him going through the darkest hours. He came through it with invaluable insights, and he's on a mission to make a profound difference. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. David Fajgenbaum. David, how are you? I always say thank you to my guests for being here, and I really do appreciate it. But in this particular case, I truly am so happy to see you and that you're doing well and that you're healthy. How are you doing and how are you feeling?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to spend some time with you. I'm feeling great, and I'm approaching 9 years that I've been in remission feeling like this.
Okay, for those who don't know your story, let me just break it down and you kind of help me fill in the blanks. You essentially were a 25-year-old jock, like truly a jock, like something out of a John Hughes movie. You were the quarterback. You literally are the picture of health.
Yep.
Not good health, like amazing health. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you got diagnosed with this incredibly rare disease called Castleman Disease in 2010. You were 25. From my understanding, Castleman Disease is essentially a hyperactive immune system that sort of kills itself. So help me figure out if that's all right and give the audiences an idea of what you went through at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The only other things I'd add is that at the time I was a medical student, and I wanted to be a medical student and go into medicine because I just lost my mom to cancer just a few years before, and that's really what was motivating me and driving me. But just as you said, out of nowhere, I became critically ill with this horrible disease. I went from being on these medical school rotations where I was taking care of patients to all of a sudden being hospitalized because all of my organs were shutting down. And we had no idea what the diagnosis was, but my liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow, my heart, my lungs, all just started shutting down. And so I went from a medical school exam down the hall to the emergency department. They hospitalized me and then transferred me to the intensive care unit because everything was shutting down. Just to give you a sense for how sick I was, requiring daily transfusions to keep me alive. I was on dialysis because my kidneys weren't working.
Right.
I was drifting in and out of consciousness for weeks and weeks. And there was a certain point 11 weeks in where I was so sick that my doctors told my family that I wasn't likely to survive. And a priest came into my room and read me my last rites. It was as dire as it could possibly be, all before finally being diagnosed with this disease called idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, which is a rare disease, just as you described, where the immune system attacks your vital organs for an unknown cause. It just attacks them relentlessly until you stop the immune system. So with the diagnosis came treatment, and I was so sick by the time I got chemotherapy that I actually felt better with every dose of chemotherapy. I mean, like I was getting loads of like the most intense, horrible chemos, but thankfully they kicked in really just in time and saved my life.
Yeah.
But I went on to have a number of relapses. And so I learned that I couldn't just trust and hope the medical system to figure this out. Because with each relapse, I would spend a month in the ICU, critical condition, I would nearly die. I would nearly go on to die 5 times.
3 years, right? 5 times in 3 years?
In a 3-year period, exactly. And so it was after the 4th one when I basically realized that it was unlikely I could survive another one, and that I could no longer just hope that some researcher somewhere would find a drug that could save my life. If I wanted to hope for a future, then I would need to turn my hope into action and try to find a drug that could maybe save me.
Okay, first of all, you being a quarterback jock, running, I can't run down a flight of subway steps without being out of breath, and I'm not even a smoker. You going from that pinnacle of a picture of health to literally dying almost 5 times in 3 years, that's falling off a cliff, literally. So when all of this was unraveling at furious speeds, what was going through your head? You were a 3rd-year medical student, right? So you kind of had some ideas of what was going on. So I would imagine the duality of your perspective of being a 3rd-year medical student and kind of knowing some pieces,
Yep.
but also being a patient and going, oh my God, I'm dying.
Yep.
Every organ is literally shutting down. What was happening like within yourself?
Yeah, exactly as you described. It was so tough because it's so difficult for anyone to go through illness, no matter what your background or your experiences are. But then if you layer on top of that, the numbers have an extra set of meaning.
Yeah.
If someone told me, your platelets are 7,000, we're worried about you. If I wasn't in medicine, I would said, okay, well, they're worried about me, but I'm not going to worry too much.
Yeah.
But because I had just been working in that same intensive care unit and every patient I saw that had platelets of 7,000 had died within the next couple of days, all of a sudden the numbers brought this whole nother level of fear.
Yeah.
I think that having just lost my mom to cancer just a few years before, I think also meant that everything felt so much more real. I think that all of us in life, at least many of us, have sort of a belief that things will sort of work out when they should, that the right things happen to the right people.
Right.
We encounter the unfairness of life. And
Yeah.
I had really come to terms with that just a few years before when I saw my incredible mom suffer and die from cancer.
I'm so sorry for that loss. I know how horrible that is.
Thank you.
But you had this fear, and I think you're right. In some cases, ignorance is bliss couldn't be truer in that regard.
Yes.
So you're being so smart screwed you
Yes.
in the longer run. Yeah.
Well, what was tough too is while I was in the ICU, my liver and my kidneys were not working. And so I was very confused. I was having a really hard time. I think that made it almost more frustrating and difficult because I knew these numbers meant something, but I also knew my brain wasn't working the way that it needed to.
I can't even imagine what that's like. You were critically sick many times.
Yeah.
Being that your organs were not working properly, and I would imagine frustrating and fear, like straight terror of what you were experiencing as a person, trying to understand it as a doctor, having a better sense than most, right?
Yes.
Can you share a moment within yourself when you were laying in the ICU that you were grappling with that may have been difficult? How did you come to terms with it? And how have you taken what you learned in that particular moment? And I would imagine that there would be many moments where you were just struggling with the fear and the mortality issue.
Yes.
Also knowing what it's like to be on the end of losing someone because you had just lost your mom. And now you're in the situation where your mom was in, and now you're seeing the rest of your family being, you have like this complete 360 perspective.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what that experience felt like and what did you learn and how did you manage that?
Yeah. These are such important questions. Yes. I mean, I sat in a similar room just like that with my mom, with my sisters and my dad next to me. And then all of a sudden here, my sisters and my dad were in those same places, but I was, now in the place that my mom had been in.
Yeah.
You mentioned there were probably lots of moments. There actually is one moment in particular that really was burned in my memory. And that was about 7 weeks into my illness and critical condition and all the things that I mentioned. What I didn't mention is that I gained about 70 pounds of fluid because my liver and my kidneys were not working. So
Mm.
fluid was just sort of pouring everywhere. And your kidneys are supposed to take fluid out of your body, but if they're not working, then the fluid just goes everywhere. And so I had 70 pounds of fluid. And when that happens, it stretches the sacs around your heart and your lungs and your abdomen. And it feels like just sort of constant knife-like. It feels like someone stabbing you constantly for like weeks.
Oh, God.
And it's the most unbearable pain. You know, I've broken a lot of bones and had a lot of injuries in football and nothing compared to even, anything like this.
Wow.
It was sort of weeks of just like sort of the ultimate complete just suffering and pain. And I remember there was a point with every breath, it was really painful because like I said, there was fluid basically making the sacs around my lungs expand so much that it was so hard to breathe. And I just wanted to slow down breathing and stop breathing because there was so much pain. But I knew that if I slowed down my breathing and stopped breathing, I was going to die. I remember sitting with my sister next to me and my dad was in the room. I remember thinking, if I just slow down my breathing, if I just stop right now, I'm going to pass, but I may be saving a couple days worth of pain and suffering that I would have had. And I would, pass anyway in a couple days. But I remember right when I thought that, hearing my sister say, just breathe, Dave, it made me want to keep fighting for, even if it was just going to be 2 more days. And so I did keep breathing. And I remembered it was painful, but it was like, I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to keep fighting. Because even if it's just 2 more days that I wouldn't have had with my sisters and my dad.
Right.
And, here I am 12 years from that. As I think about this, it's like if I'd given up then, I would have thought I was giving up on a couple days. I would have had no idea that I was giving up on 12 years of life and happiness and cures and treatments and progress for so many people beyond myself. So a couple things that I learned from that moment that I want to share.
Yeah.
One is that if someone had told me that you're going to keep suffering like this and in pain for months more, I don't know if I could have. But it was like, keep breathing, Dave, like right now. It's sort of that old adage about, 1 day at a time, 1 hour at a time. And it was like, I could not have wrapped my head around this going on for 6 months.
Right.
And I would have given up. No way I would have had the fortitude to keep fighting, but I could handle it for another hour or another few hours or another day. And it really was this sort of 1 hour at a time mentality. Second was that without my sister and both sisters and my dad by my side, I wouldn't have been able to keep focusing on the short term, getting through the next hour,
Right.
leaning on the people you love, getting strength from their strength. And then the third was a vision for the future. At the time, I was also dreaming about what I wasn't going to have. And that was, oh my gosh, I wish I could have had a family. I wish I could have gotten married to Caitlin. I wish I could have spent a life searching for cures for diseases in memory of my mom. And so it's focusing on the next hour, having the support by your side, and then the dream for the future for what you're going after. And that's really driven me so much.
I love that you laid that out so beautifully because I think not only would you have given up on quote unquote what seemed to be 2 days or whatever,
Yep.
you would have given up a gigantic league of people that you have saved since then.
Yes, exactly.
That's insane.
I mean, and that's what's so hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah. You went through all of this hell with this illness. And I want to get back to these lessons because these are huge moments, even though when people say, oh, just breathe, it's not that easy when you're in a situation that's that painful or that perilous.
Yeah.
And all the doctors in the medical community said that there was no real cure for Castleman disease, right? You were basically out of hope. There was no treatment. There's no medicine. You decide to essentially use yourself as a guinea pig and go out and find drugs that exist on the market that were not used for your disease, correct?
That's right.
And to test it on yourself. Can you detail that a little bit better? Because I don't know if I wrote that down correctly.
Sure, you nailed it. I had a disease where there were no options. And so that meant to me, in my brain, it was, okay, if there's no options for my disease, maybe there's another disease that's similar enough to this one where there is an option for that disease, and maybe that drug could work for me. And it wasn't because I knew it was the case, or it wasn't because I really believed it was the case. It was because I knew it was my only option. When I relapsed and nearly died for the 4th time, That was the game plan was, okay, if I've got a few months to live, I've got to try to see if there's an existing drug that could maybe fix this disease. And the only way to do that is to better understand what was happening in my disease. And so I started running experiments on my own blood samples and trying to figure out what was going wrong. Why was my immune system trying to kill me?
Yeah.
What was going wrong in those immune cells? And I searched and I did so much work for a year, and then I relapsed again, and I didn't do it in time.
Oh, wow.
And I almost died now for the 5th time. And I remember as I was laying in the ICU bed, and at this stage, my girlfriend at the time, Caitlin, was sitting next to me, and we'd just gotten engaged, and I just felt like I had let her down. I had, let myself down. I tried so hard, and I found 2 drugs that I thought could work, and they didn't work. And I was so disappointed because that was it. Those were my 2 shots. And
yeah,
I tried it and it didn't work. Thankfully, chemotherapy saved my life just barely again. And I got out of the hospital. And again, I knew I only had months to try to find something again, but I had another shot.
Right.
And during that extra shot, I just worked all day, every day. I remember I was either in the lab all day, every day, not eating, just working all day. Or if I was reviewing data from home, I remember Caitlin putting food in front of me because I couldn't get up. It was just this ultimate focus, and eventually identified that a drug that's been around for 50 years that had never been used for my disease was discovered and used for organ transplantation. So if you get a kidney or a liver, your immune system will attack that if you get
right.
a transplant. And so this is a transplant rejection drug, prevents your immune system from attacking. And the way it does that is by turning off this communication line in your immune system that I found out from my experiments was turned into overdrive.
Right.
So I thought maybe if this communication line is turned into overdrive, maybe we can ramp this whole thing down by trying this drug. And to be honest, I really didn't think it was all that likely to work. I thought there was maybe a 10% chance, but I knew 10% was better than 0%.
Yeah.
I knew that math enough. Was that 10 was better than 0, and so I shared the data with one of my doctors, and he agreed that, it probably wasn't going to work, but let's give it a shot. And, here I am.
Thank God.
Almost 9 years later.
Let me ask you this. When you were doing this, did people not think you were batshit crazy?
Yes, 100%. I mean, there's a couple of things you can do when you're given a terminal illness, or a few things you can do. And I think all of them are totally appropriate, and everyone has to do what's right for them. But, one is that you just spend the time with the people you love.
Right.
You just sort of soak up every moment. Another is you go crazy running to try to find a drug like I did. Is there something out there? People start foundations, they start companies, they do things like that.
Yeah.
And then the third is you just go to Vegas and you just sort of live out your time, just, going wild. For me, it was either going to be family or it was going to be trying to find a cure. And
so Vegas was out.
Vegas was out. That wasn't going to be my solution, but there's plenty of people where that's what they pick, and that's totally their right.
Totally.
For me, it was family, or it was all in on this disease. But you can imagine that when you go all in on the disease, you're in essence making a decision not to spend that time with your family, right?
Yes.
And so that's a really tough decision to make.
Right.
By saying I'm going to go all in on this disease, it really meant that I was really limiting the time that I would have with my family, my friends, my fiance. It was a tough decision, but I really did think that it was the right one.
I guess that brings me to the question, and I'm glad you addressed that, because when you go all in the way you did, first of all, you're going against the entire medical community that's saying that there's no hope left, right?
Yes.
Which in itself is completely crushing.
Yes.
Because you're talking about an entire scientific community is saying there is no cure. We've done everything that we can.
Yes.
And respectfully, you're a third-year medical student. And that's not to say that that's incredible,
exactly.
But it's like a David and Goliath story. You're standing against an entire tsunami.
100%.
So that's the first choice. The second choice is when you're all in, you're literally shutting your family out.
Yes.
In order to be all in, right? You're letting it all ride on this one number.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very difficult choice. What sort of made you go, all right, I'm going to let it all ride here, despite the fact that the entire community is saying, this is it. I'm going to risk whatever little time I have with my family. Caitlin, who is now your wife, you're robbing yourself potentially and them.
Yes.
Of the moments that you could share. So what was the linchpin that made you go, this is the right thing for me?
It's a really important question. And honestly, when I look back on it objectively, I think that if you make an objective decision, like what's the likelihood you're going to find something, which I don't know, maybe 1 in a million or something like that, versus the likelihood of not finding something, I think you objectively make the decision to spend time with your family,
Yeah.
given time to think. And I think that's probably the right decision, honestly.
Yeah.
I think I made the decision to go for a treatment and to try to find something because I loved my family so much. And because I didn't want the decision to be like 2 months now and then nothing later. It was like, I know that I'm risking what if there could be more time with them? Like you said, it was deciding to not spend time with them, but it was because I wanted to be with them that I was choosing not to.
That's a risky move. I don't think you need to go to Vegas for those odds. You really played,
I
you
know, I was
really
just
ran the
thinking.
table. I'm not even kidding. That's some gambling there, buddy. I'm never going to Vegas with you because I can't, I get pissed when I lose at slots. But here's my thing also. You are someone that strikes me as, despite what looks completely guaranteed bleak, pretty much, correct me if I'm wrong, you were written off because you had
Yeah.
your last rites read to you. And again, you had that weird duality of you being in the chair sitting by your mom, and now your family is sitting in the chair waiting for you. And all of this is really coming to fruition with a priest coming in. You still had hope during the scariest and most frightening and bleak moments. Where does that come from, and how did you hold on to it?
It's such an important question. You know, the subtitle of my book is A Doctor's Race to Turn Hope into Action. And it's because
Yes.
trying to turn hope into action, and it was a race. It was like the ultimate challenge of my life is
Yes.
try to, find a little bit of hope that was there and then to turn it into action. I think that I gained hope from spending time around the people that I loved. They were hopeful that I would be there longer. And as you said, it was sort of like blind hope, right? Because
Yeah.
I knew from the medical perspective, there was no reason to be hopeful, but they were hopeful. And I sort of like grabbed onto their hope and their belief.
Right.
And actually, Caitlin, my now wife, she was like so confident I was going to find a drug. And I kept being like, I wish I had your confidence. I am not confident at all that I'm going to find a drug
Right.
that's going to help me. But you were like certain that I'm going to. And it is completely unfounded certainty.
Yeah.
But it was their hope. It was like my sisters and my dad and Caitlin, they just believed in me. And I think that's a broader lesson for all of us. Having people around you that you love believe in you can make you start to believe in yourself and make you, can create some hope. And then once you have a little bit of hope, at least for me, taking action. So hope can inspire action.
Yeah.
And then once you start taking action, which is looking into the disease, looking into my immune cells, that can give me more hope. And so, okay, now I'm more hopeful, which can inspire more action. And there's this sort of circuit where it's like hope inspiring action. And, the more action you take, the more hope you have.
This is the most extraordinary thing because it's a very complicated and scary world right now, to say the least.
Yes.
And I think hope is something that sounds like something out of a fairy tale, especially your story. It seems like something out of a fairy tale. Respectfully, again, you're a third-year medical student standing against an entire fleet of proven experts with decades of experience. And you're saying, go find a cure. And it's almost like, are you feeling okay? You know what I mean? Like, is there something okay here? But the other thing is also you found a cure with drugs that already exist. After everything that you have been through, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, no one would fault you, I think, if you were to just go about your life, have a pina colada somewhere and just do your thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But taking what you said earlier, and I think you said you were a man on fire. You're a best-selling author. You wrote a book called Chasing My Cure, detailing your story. You have started incredible foundations, I think, correct? Multiple foundations, which is the everycure.org, which I'm going to ask you about. And you also started the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. So you haven't stopped. You're still on fire. Maybe not a 5-alarm fire, but still you're ablaze. You're ablaze. Okay, you're on fire. So how have you continued your work? Break down what everycure.org is and also break down the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. What they both are and what you've been able to do.
I think I should start out by just sharing a little bit about my mom, actually, because she,
Yes, please.
the way she lived really has inspired and made me the way that I live. My mom was the most incredible person in the world. She was so focused on everyone else. And I remember when she was fighting her cancer, she was always so worried about how I was going to be in college. Was I okay? Sort of always worried about everyone else. And not just worried, but always, once she would worry about someone else, then she would take action. She was the person that was there when someone was having a tough day to lean on her shoulder and for her to hold their hand. That was just who my mom was. After she passed away, and actually just a couple weeks before she passed away, she was worried about me. As I shared, she was thinking about everyone. And I told her, I said, Mom, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to start an organization in your memory for college students just like me. And I'm going to call it AMF. My mom's name was Anne Marie Fajgenbaum. Her initials were AMF. I didn't know what AMF would stand for, and I really didn't know what AMF was going to do, but this is the last thing I promised my mom. And she loved the idea. She said unconditional love. That's the last thing that my mom told me. So 2 weeks later, when I returned to college after her passing, I had made this promise to her, and oh my gosh, I was going to follow through on it. I didn't know what it was going to be, but it turned into an organization to help grieving college students, to support one another while we were coping with the illness or death of a loved one. So AMF has continued. It's almost 20 years now that AMF has been supporting college students all over the country. And I haven't been involved for the last 10 years. But the reason I bring it up is that experience of going from the ultimate pain of losing my mom, who I just loved so much, and to lose her and the pain that I went through, I found that actually starting AMF and being able to channel that pain and grief into something proactive was actually the ultimate healing tool for me. Being able to know that, like, when I was having a tough time, I could spend that time in a support group meeting with other college students grieving with the loss of a loved one, or raising money for brain cancer in my mom's memory. It's something called instrumental grief. It's basically you channel your grief towards something positive. And it was completely life-changing for me. So when I was then battling Castleman disease and continued to battle Castleman disease and decided to take on the disease, it became abundantly clear to me that this wasn't going to be David Fajgenbaum Foundation for Castleman Disease. This was going to be about creating the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network so that we could take on Castleman disease together. Because I had just taken on college student grief with a bunch of other grieving college students, and we made progress, when we shouldn't have, helped one another when there wasn't any support. And that experience was, in many ways, was almost like a training ground. It was sort of where I sharpened my skills at building an organization and setting a strategy and taking something on. In that case, it was grieving college students, but now it would be Castleman disease.
I appreciate this. It's giving me a lot of insight in your mom and how she was as a person really came into who you really are in the most fundamental,
Yes.
Foundational kind of way.
There's one part genetics, there's one part that she inspired me, but there's another part that I just want to be like her. I want to keep her alive through doing the things that she would have continued to do. And so AMF, the confidence when maybe I shouldn't even have had it, but the belief that, like, I could build something that could maybe take on Castleman's and help Castleman's patients.
Yeah.
And we've made tremendous progress. So the drug that I'm on has now been given to hundreds, probably thousands of patients around the world and saved many patients' lives. We've gone on to identify 9 more drugs like that one that were made for a disease different from the disease that we're now using it in.
Yeah.
Sort of, again, an incalculable number of patients that are alive because of these drugs that weren't made for those diseases that we were able to uncover. So in the process of doing that, it's become really clear to me that the drugs that are at our neighborhood pharmacies could actually be used in more ways than we currently use them for.
Yeah.
No one had ever used sirolimus to treat Castleman disease until we figured it out. And that led me to ask the question, how many more drugs are there that could be used in more ways than we know?
Seriously.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, and I don't know which one it is, if it's unfortunate or fortunate, there are a lot more.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You wish that there weren't a lot more. You wish that, like, we'd figured them out. But the good news is that means there's more out there. We just need to find them.
Yeah.
But the system really is not built to figure out more uses for existing drugs. The system is built to find new drugs for more diseases. If it makes sense, it's new drug development is
money.
Is much more commercially viable than finding new uses for old drugs.
Yeah.
Especially when those drugs are generic, because 90% of drugs are already generic, which means that no one can make money off them. So we're in this really, like I said, sad, unfortunate situation, but also potentially a good situation in that means that there are cures that are sitting on the pharmacy shelf. We just need to unlock them. This fall, I launched a new organization called Every Cure, which is on a mission to unlock the full potential of existing medicines so that no patients are told we've tried everything when there's a cure that's sitting on the pharmacy shelf.
I'm on the fence with you about whether that's good or not.
I know.
And again, this is just my own silly brain working. The fact of the matter is, it comes down to money, that we're not able to look at the things that we have
Yes.
that could work for other things easily.
Yep.
And just manufacturing more stuff because it's more money. That's, again, in my stupid little brain, that feels like every time I can't find a sock in the dryer, I'm buying more socks.
Yes.
And then I have socks everywhere and I can't find anything. And yet I have a million of them. And I'm like, wow.
Yes.
I mean, it's so dumb the way I'm processing the information, but is that kind of accurate? It's like, I can't find my one sock. So let me buy another bag of socks. And then I end up having just 100 socks everywhere. And I still can't find a set.
That is actually the most perfect analogy that I've heard, honestly. Like, I've been trying to like understand, like, how do we boil this down? Because I've been thinking about it in terms of keys. Like, you've got all these keys that open up doors, but actually there's like patients on the other side of these doors that could benefit. You could unlock the disease with one of these keys, but we're just, let's make a new key and let's spend 10 years and $1 billion to make that new key.
Yeah.
Because the existing key is basically free. So no one can make money off of it. And I think what's tough is that I'm alive because of one of these drugs. And so it's not just like theoretical. It's not just like, they could be out there. It's that they're there. And we've seen other patients benefit from existing drugs. So the drugs are there. The problem is the system just isn't really built to uncover existing drugs. No one in all of medical research, this is actually kind of mind-blowing, no one in all of medical research is tasked with figuring out all the uses for approved medicines. Like, that's mind-blowing, right? So drug companies...
That sucks.
It's crazy. It sucks. It totally sucks. So if you can think about it this way, the federal government, the NIH, does amazing research to come up with new discoveries, new drugs, new insights. Like, that's what the government does a great job of. And then the next step is for pharmaceutical companies to pick up which of those drugs look most promising and then to pick which diseases to take those drugs forward in. And then the FDA says, yes, it's good, or no, it's not good enough for that disease. But they give an approval for this drug for this disease.
Right.
And then it's up to no one to figure out all of the other diseases the drug can be used for. And drug companies in the early stages of a newly approved drug will do work to find more drugs that drug can work for. But once a few years have passed by and you're getting closer to that drug becoming generic, now it actually costs more money to do the clinical trials to prove that it works than they can expect to get back in profit.
Oh.
The math doesn't add up for the companies. As a company, the math has to add up, right? The money you put in has to be less than the money you expect to get out. So I don't think that they're evil for not doing it.
Yeah.
There's just no business model. So all of a sudden that drug becomes generic and now no one is trying to figure out new uses for it. So it's this system problem, right?
Yeah.
It's not that anyone's evil, it's a system problem. So with Every Cure, what we're doing is trying to create this central data engine to match together drugs and diseases so that every drug that could be used in every other disease is all in one place and we really track it in one place.
Yeah.
And then we raise money from philanthropic organizations and from the general public to actually do the clinical trials. Like, if pharmaceutical companies don't want to do it, let's just do it ourselves.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, it's going to help you or me or someone we love. Let's just do it.
I love that. How can the average Joe help support everycure.org and also the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network? Because, I failed biology twice, David, because I couldn't put the pin in the worm because I was just too squeamish. So forget the frog. So I cheated off my lab partner. But anyway, I have always thought that we have a pill for everything imaginable.
Yes.
There has to be something out there that can work, that can at least take a bigger bite out of, let's say, these long-standing devastating diseases like cancer.
Yes.
There's no way that we have these incredible technologies like the internet or like satellite or cell phones and landing people on the moon.
Yep.
And we can't find a damn thing except pouring mustard gas into somebody for cancer.
Yes, for chemo.
There has to be something on the shelf that can take a bigger bite. And it makes me crazy to know that there is this huge hole in our system that there's nobody that's managed and trying to figure this out. So are you trying to bridge that gap? And how can the average Joe support you and both organizations in your efforts?
Yeah, that's right. We're trying to fill this gap. And it's only through my personal experience and then the more we've dug that this gap has become so clear. I mean, it's such a huge gap that when I talk to officials of the FDA, they say, like, we need this. And I'm like, but you're the FDA. Like, isn't this, but it's not within their purview. It's just not. Like,
Right.
Their job is to regulate companies, say, yes, it's approved or no, it's not approved for that disease that you studied it in.
Yeah.
So they see the value. And even throughout the whole medical system, drug companies recognize that there's a lot more opportunities with existing drugs. But again, the math doesn't add up and no one is responsible for this. So this is a total David versus Goliath again, but it's really it's really where we as a society, I think, need to come together and say, this is not acceptable. If there's a cure for my mom or my dad or me or someone I love that could help them, but no one knows about it because it's generic and no one's doing research, we've got to change that.
Yeah.
We're trying to fill that gap right now. And so anyone can go to everycure.org and they can donate towards this work. Step one, building the data engine. Step two, launch clinical trials. Nothing like this has ever been done before, but it's time. It's about time that we make sure that we fill this gap.
I think nothing's been done like this before. That's sort of your mantra. That should be like on a t-shirt that you wear. I'm dying of a rare disease, but I'm going to take something that exists on the shelf, test it on myself, tell the entire medical community they don't know shit, and I'm going to be here. This is your MO, David, and I love it. So I think you need to put this on a shirt and sell merchandise and people will wear it, because I do think that is just so impressive. So basically every person go donate to everycure.org, be it $1, $5, whatever they can give.
Exactly.
And it's every little pebble can build sort of the beach, so to speak.
Exactly.
And the same thing for Castleman Disease Collaborative. And through Castleman's Disease Collaborative, you've actually saved many, many lives with people who suffer from the same disease you did.
Yeah, it's hard to put into words what it was like. The first patient after me to get this drug, and then the next patient, the next patient.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it does not work for all patients. So we can treat a little bit over half of Castleman's patients with treatments other than chemotherapy now. And that's better than before, but it's certainly not 100%. And so we're still pushing for in the Castleman's realm. And I so appreciate you mentioning the CDCN as well. It's cdcn.org is the website for Castleman disease. But sort of going back to this sort of mentality, I think that, honestly, I've taken this straight out of Dumb and Dumber. So there's a part in Dumb and Dumber when, I hope you remember this part, and I hope you've seen Dumb and Dumber, but in it, I remember it's Lawyer Harry's talking to Mary Swanson, and he's like, what are the chances here? And she's like, probably like 1 in a million. And he gets this like huge smile on his face. He's like, so you're saying there's a chance? And I think that's what we have here, right? Is that, it was like 1 in a million that we'd find a drug for me. And it's like, all right, so you're saying there's a chance. And, that's what we're trying to do here with EveryCure. And the thing about EveryCure is that because we're looking across all drugs and all diseases, it's no longer 1 in a million. We know there are many drugs out there that are on the pharmacy shelf that could be used in new ways, but the incentives weren't in place to investigate them. And so it's much more like close to 100% with these shots on goal that we're going to find drugs that are going to save lives. The key question is, it won't be that it's necessarily going to be for Castleman's or disease X, Y, or Z that's on your mind or my mind, but we're going to find the diseases and the drugs that can make the most impact and save the most lives.
So you've actually found some drugs that help cancer and COVID-19, is that correct?
That's right. Well, the first drug we found outside of Castleman disease was a drug back in 2013. A researcher did some work in the lab, similar to the kind of work that I'd done in the lab on myself, but for a rare cancer called Angiosarcoma, a horrible cancer, uniformly fatal. They did work in 2013 and they uncovered a treatment, or they uncovered this basically part of the immune system that they thought could help to treat the cancer called PD-1. And it was published in 2013 and no one did anything with it. So in 2016, 3 years later, like that paper, there's like billions of papers published and they just sort of get lost.
Yeah.
This is like saying that there's like potential treatment for this horrible disease, but no one did anything with it. Fast forward to 2016 and a patient came to our center, metastatic angiosarcoma, no treatment options. And the doctor had said, you've got 3 to 6 months. So we just started doing any sort of searches online to try to find something. We came across this paper that suggested this drug could be used. And so we repeated the same experiment that was done on the drug on this patient's cancer, and it came back like blazingly positive, very similar to the result for me, which was basically telling us we should try this drug for him.
Yeah.
So we did, and he's been alive for over 6 years now.
That is amazing.
We did this in 2016, and now there are multiple clinical trials going on of this class of drugs for angiosarcoma, and a lot of patients are benefiting and alive because of it. And the thing that's so important about this is that it didn't even require any feat of brilliance. It just required looking online, finding a paper,
Right.
and then repeating it in this patient, and then just giving him a drug. We didn't have to even think about what to study. So that's what I'm so excited about with every cure, is that these breadcrumbs are all over the place.
Oh my God.
But no one is tasked with picking up the breadcrumbs and following the breadcrumbs back to the solution. So that's what we're doing. I couldn't be more excited.
Oh my God, I'm so excited about this. That's one of the many reasons why I got you here, because I'm like, how can we fast track this? Let me just emphasize. So no donation is too small, right?
Yes,
Every bit helps you to help others, right?
exactly.
So there's something I wanted to ask you, and this is kind of going personal. When you were sitting by your mom's bedside and she was not well and she was dying, based on those moments that you might have had, as well as just knowing who she was as a woman,
Mhm.
what did that teach you when you were fighting for your own life?
Gosh, such an important question. I learned so much from her. When I think back to those 2 moments, because there's 2 times I was sitting by her bedside that immediately come to mind. One of them was definitely the fact that she kept being so concerned about everyone else was sort of this really important lesson that, like, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter, how horrible things are, keeping the people you love
Mhm.
at the top of your priority list is just so important. Being considerate and concerned about the people you love, even when they're concerned about what you're going through. I think that was one takeaway. I think another was, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is this sort of concept of like grace and willpower. So she was like both graceful about the way that she was passing, but she had this incredible willpower where, she was going to do the things she wanted to do before she passed from her cancer. I remember we went to the grocery store just a couple months before she passed, and she had one of those motorized carts to get around because for brain cancer, she wasn't able to walk well.
Mhm.
I remember helping to get her into this cart, and once she hit go, I realized that she actually would start going in circles because she couldn't use the other hand because
Oh, wow.
you basically squeeze both sides to go straight.
Yeah.
So the cart started going in circles. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this has got to be embarrassing for her or sad
Yeah.
and she like rounds this circle with like the biggest smile on her face. And she thinks it's just like the funniest thing that she's like doing donuts in this grocery store. She just took what was like a horrible thing and just grabbed it by the horns and made it like a funny thing. And it became a memory that I have with my mom
Right.
almost 20 years later, is this memory of her like cracking up doing donuts in a grocery store. And it was like totally unintentional. And it, like I said, it could have been horrible.
Right.
But like that's who my mom was. It was like in the
Right.
middle of this horrible thing, she's just going to make it something positive, and it's something that we laughed about and loved.
That seems like that's threaded through your own story and your own survival story, because honestly, just listening to your experience pisses me off in the sense that like this has been sitting on the shelf and no one's doing it. I have to say that, and I don't have an eloquent way of saying this because I'm just not quite that articulate, but the amount of courage and, let's just face it, balls that you had go against the entire community to overcome what quote unquote is certain facts
Yes.
and to roll that dice. And I'm not trying to be facetious about it, and going back to the Vegas thing,
Yeah.
but that truly is such an incredible, like, how did you not feel defeated? I mean, just the fear alone could have froze you,
Yeah.
David. So like, where does this keep on keeping on come from?
Yeah. I think that it's really this sort of, getting hope from the people around me. And it's turning that little bit of hope into action. If there's any chance that this could work, let's take some action. And then you start getting results back that look promising, and you meet other patients and you realize that like, we've got to keep going. And then that makes you more hopeful. And then you want to keep fighting. And it's a circuit. It's like a little bit of hope turning into a little bit of action. And then, all of a sudden you're in a place where you can be really hopeful about a disease like Castleman disease, because it's been 10 years of research and we've completely turned the tide against this disease. And like I said, we've still got work to do.
Yeah.
But it's a whole different discussion today than it was 10 years ago or 12 years ago when I first got sick.
You talked about your sister saying, just breathe right now, David. Like, just take that minute by minute.
Yep.
And I think that's very hard.
Yeah.
But was there a moment where you felt like, oh, like I don't have anything left in me. I'm gassed out. And how did you overcome it? And how do you apply that lesson in your everyday life beyond the illness?
Yeah. There have been a few times or more than a few times I was, really felt like I was just out of gas. I can't do this anymore. I think probably the lowest point emotionally for me was not when I was in the ICU almost dying those first 3 times over 6 months. It was actually the 4th time. And the reason it was so hard the 4th time was there actually was a drug in development for my disease. There was a clinical trial going on, and it was supposed to be the cure that we didn't have for my mom.
Right.
It was like, oh my gosh, like this is it. And we had heard about how I was helping other patients, and it was amazing to hear. And so the sort of the height, the highness of like, oh my gosh, like there's a drug coming down was just contrasted when I relapsed on that drug. And my doctor explained to me that there were no more promising leads. It wasn't like there was nothing to start with. It was that there was something.
Yeah.
And that one thing that I was like putting my hope into didn't work. That was, I think, almost even harder than if like there wasn't anything from the beginning. It was that there was one thing, and that one thing didn't work.
Yeah.
And the one thing that drug worked on was the only thing that we knew about in the whole disease. We didn't know anything about any other part of the disease. When my doctor came into the room and explained to me that there were no more drugs in development and that there were no more promising leads, and that I was going to continue to relapse, and that eventually I was not going to survive one of these relapses, or the chemotherapy was going to stop working. It was just sort of a matter of time.
Yeah.
And that I may not even survive that one. That for me was maybe the most crushing.
Yeah.
But I'd sort of gotten my hopes up, frankly. I mean, I was very hopeful that drug was going to be the drug for me. So I'd gotten my hopes up, and then I was really crushed.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, what helped me get back up? I can remember that moment so well. I could see my sisters and Caitlin, my girlfriend at the time, my dad, sitting in the room around me. And I remember just seeing their faces, and we're all bawling. Like none of us are saying anything. We're just all crying. There's snot everywhere. And
yeah. It's the ugly cry.
this is the ugly cry, like when you saw that this could work and then it didn't.
Yeah.
It was like sort of the lowest of the lows. I don't know exactly what it was that triggered this, but I can promise you it was inspired in some way by my mom. But it was to look at them and to say, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to trying to find a drug for this disease. And I remember pausing to say, however long that may be, I'm going to spend the rest of my life, however long that be, to try to find a drug for this disease. My sisters are amazing. My dad and Caitlin, they're all amazing. They all kind of like gave me this look like, we're going to try, but like, okay, Dave,
Yeah.
we can try, but it certainly wasn't, it wasn't the sort of enthusiastic.
It seems like a dreamer.
Yes.
Yeah. It was sort of like one of those romanticizing this like idea.
Yes.
It's like a dreamer. But I mean, at this point, you're at the end of the line, pretty much.
Exactly. And they'd already seen this sort of play out with my mom, right?
Yeah.
We had been this hopeful at times, and we had the rallying cries, and we had the hugs in the hospitals where like, it's going to happen and this drug's going to work.
Yeah.
I know in some way my mom's life inspired me to want to give it a try. Once I started digging into the work, Caitlin had this sort of optimism about how quickly I was going to find a drug. And thankfully she did. Helped me to keep saying like, if Caitlin thinks I can do it, maybe I can. I don't think I can do it, but Caitlin thinks I can do it.
You know what? I think what you said earlier and what's on your book, Turning Hope into Action, for me is a really good snapshot of one of the, I'm sure, many life lessons that your mom embodied and passed on to you. As I'm hearing you talk about all of this, I'm just going to break this down the way I'm seeing it.
Perfect.
It's one thing to have hope, and in your situation, to have hope when people are literally telling to your face, all signs are pointing that this is it. There's nothing that we can do. It's one thing to have hope, hoping that you don't run into like rush hour traffic and you get to work on time. It's a whole nother ballgame to have hope in the face of the situation that you are having. And that's not even talking about the fear, like the
Yeah.
actual medical community that have done decades of experiences in science and work is telling you, David, we got nothing left. The second thing that I love, and I think hope alone, then turning it into action is like a whole nother stratosphere to do something about it. And then to make those two connect, I think that is something that we really don't see often. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I so appreciate you saying these kind words.
I'm
Like,
just being real.
I feel like I've just been so fortunate, the most amazing mom that taught me a lot of these things. But I do think that all of us hope for things in our days. And as you said, sometimes it's hoping about rush hour. Sometimes it's hoping,
Yeah.
a loved one's illness, or maybe it's hoping about a relationship. But we all hope about things, and we all wish about things, and some people pray about things. Throughout our days, we spend a lot of time thinking about this thing that we want. In many cases, there are things that we have very little control over.
Yeah.
Many of us are hoping for an end to the crisis in Ukraine, right? I mean, that's obviously something that
Right.
I don't think anyone's not hoping for, wishing for, praying for, right? But that feels like a difficult thing for us to have an impact on.
Sure.
However, when we're hoping for something, a loved one's health or a relationship, it can still sometimes feel like it's out of our control.
Yeah.
But what I've learned is that a lot of these things, there's no guarantee, right? It's sort of that 1 in a million versus 0 in a million, right? Where like,
Yeah.
maybe taking action gets you to 1 in a million or 1 in 100 chance, but not taking action oftentimes has like a 0% chance. And
Yeah.
so, and it's not to say that you need to go into the laboratory and start doing experiments on samples from yourself or someone you love, but it's going online and finding out what is the best resource for this disease. What's the organization that knows the most about this disease?
Right.
And what doctor are they recommending? Can I get in a car and just drive with my sister or whoever it may be
Right.
to that doctor's appointment, halfway across the country or whatever I have to do? But it's sort of getting in this realm of reflecting. I do this myself, reflecting on what am I hoping for? What am I praying for? What am I wishing for? And then ask, what can I do today to get closer to that thing that I'm hoping for? The quick way of describing it that I talk about in the book is this concept of think it, do it, which is like, okay, you're going to wish for something. And then you're like, what can I do today? And as soon as you think about what you can do today, just start doing it. Because the worst thing you can do is say like, I'll do it tomorrow or the next day. It's just
Right.
think it, do it.
After going through such harrowing experiences, and also now being able to help so many, but the caveat also is that there will be some people that you cannot help.
Yes.
What has being confronted by death taught you about life?
It's taught me just how precious life is.
Yeah.
Often talk about how I feel like I'm in overtime. If you're a sports fan, overtime is time you didn't think that you'd have. It's where like every second counts.
Yeah.
You can make a mistake in the first half of a game and you can make up for it. But in overtime, there's this ultimate focus and clarity and intensity. And so I've really brought that to my life because like I'm in overtime. I'm in my 5th overtime, right? But I think what I've learned is that we're actually all in overtime. I mean, there are people who sat by my hospital bed and said goodbye to me that I've now had to say goodbye to.
Oh, wow.
We all are in overtime. And it's so obvious for me because of what I've gone through. And I've got a port, which is what I get my treatment through every month over my chest. And all I have to do is put my hand on my heart and I can, put my hand on the back of my neck and feel a scar from a surgery. And being in overtime is very much in my face. But I've learned that we're all in overtime.
Yeah.
That can be scary, but it can also be clarifying and help us to really do the things that are important to us. Being in overtime is one thing that I've learned. I think turning hope into action is so important. All of us hope, all of us pray and wish and reflect on what those things are.
Yeah.
One thing you said as part of your question is we've been able to help a lot of people, but we also haven't been able to help everyone. And so it's really about the successes should create hope because they prove that we can do it.
Yes.
But the times where we can't help those patients just drive us to say, like, we know that there's hope there. We know there's a way to do it. We didn't figure it out here. Let's go back to the drawing board and let's keep working. That creates another one of these cycles of hope, driving action.
I think you celebrate your mom every single day on two major fronts that I could connect right now. One, constantly thinking about how you can help other people, and hope into action.
Yep.
So for what it's worth, from my observation and based on our conversation, I think you celebrate your mom every single day. And I would honestly tell you that you should, and I'm not even being facetious about this, you should go rent one of those mobile things and do a donut in a supermarket just to celebrate her. I think,
I love that.
I really do think you should do that and put it on Instagram.
I love that. I love that.
I think you really should do that. And let me just say this, and I will do this on record. After I get off with you, I am going to everycure.org and I'm going to make a personal donation to the organization because I personally, it pisses me off to know that there is so much potential. There's got to be something out there either on its own or combined with something that we're just not utilizing. And literally people are dying because there isn't a business model to support this. That's essentially the society that we're living in. David, I am going to go to everycure.org and I will be making a personal donation as much as I can. And if you send me a video of you doing a donut in a supermarket, I will go back and give you another donation.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, now I definitely have to do it.
Having been through just hell and back, you've been a patient. And I think that's an understatement because you were a patient that was dying. And you've also had the role of family member of watching someone you love so much pass. How has that made you a better doctor?
I think every physician, when we become patients, because every physician does at some point become a patient, but the sooner we become a patient, the better we are as physicians, because there's so many times where you make a decision as a physician based on a textbook or based off of what you're taught in medical school.
Right.
That just isn't necessarily the right decision. It really takes being a patient. And also you can learn a lot from having a loved one that's a patient that I think makes you a much better doctor.
Yeah, I think you should also call yourself like the Indiana Jones of like diseases, because you're like the disease hunter. And that had like a really cool like tagline.
I like it.
I'm just branding for you, David. I'm just branding for you.
Hey, I need all the help I can get.
Get the hat, get the leather jacket. I mean, you're so much more badass than that. I'm sorry, Harrison Ford. That's a movie. You're like the real deal, dude. So, okay. I can't thank you enough for all the things that you're doing out there. Before I came across your story, I had no idea that there was such a cavernous gap in our system. Because of this gap, literally people are dying.
Yep. And
moments that could have been shared with loved ones could not exist, because simply there's no money for someone to help match the socks, so to speak, going back to my metaphor.
Yes, I do think that in the midst of these tough days, getting a chance to see a patient benefit from a drug, saving their life, it gives me these glimpses of views into how great we can all be and how we can overcome so much as a society.
So, David, will you sign us off? Let me know who you are and what you represent.
I'm David Fajgenbaum, and I represent turning hope into action.
What an incredible story, right? A huge thank you to Dr. David Fajgenbaum for being here and generously sharing his experiences and lessons with us. I'm really happy to find him well and healthy. And his story is an incredible reminder that we all have the strength to face even the most daunting challenges and to keep moving forward. I know, it's not easy, but hold on to what David shared with us today. Also, huge thanks to Dr. Fajgenbaum and his team for their ongoing dedication to helping others. If you'd like to support their efforts and contribute, please donate. I personally did make a donation, and every little bit helps. I'm going to have all of his links to his organization, where you can make a donation, his books, all for you in the show notes. And to you, my listeners, thank you always for being here and for downloading. Please support the series by sharing, subscribing, leaving a review. It lets me know you're out there and it keeps me going. And if you have a few extra dollars or find some couch change, I've set up a Buy Me a Coffee link on my website at reppin.tv, as well as on my social media platforms like Instagram at reppin_podcast, YouTube, and of course, right here in the show notes. Now, I've been funding this series entirely out of my own pocket, and any small donations will help offset some of my costs. Speaking of which, Reppin is about to hit its 100th episode, and I have some special things planned, so stay tuned here and keep an eye out on my socials. And also, your donations will help me bring those specials to you. Now, in my next episode, I have a returning guest. Actress Genevieve Kang is back to share her exciting new creative venture.
I had this kind of desire to know more so that I could make a more educated decision myself about what was best for my body. I have so much respect for doctors and health practitioners of all walks of life. And I think we don't tune into our own bodies enough in a holistic way. So physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to know what is actually best for us. So we're kind of just taking the first bit of advice we get. And maybe that is the best option at any given time, but maybe also question it and get curious. Hi, my name is Genevieve Kang, and my episode is coming up next on Reppin.
Lastly, a big shout out to my incredible team, Nelson Pinero and Gracie Kong. Thank you for all that you do. Reppin is a Suburban Outlaw Productions. Until next time, stand up and represent.